Good afternoon and welcome to the March meeting of the Massachusetts Board of Early Education and Care. It's a pleasure to see all of my colleagues and to be joined by lots of folks from the field at, in many ways, I think what many of us are feeling like getting to a turning point, which is to say, thrilled that appointments are going to become available for vaccines for our early educator workforce, our most dedicated and resilient workforce that has been doing yeoman's work right through this pandemic. And with the onset of spring and more vaccines, hopefully much brighter days ahead for all, doesn't change the need for real strong adherence, continued adherence to public health practices, but certainly starts to at least relieve some, hopefully some collective anxiety about public health, and to continue to focus on the hard work of the learning and the teaching and the relationships and the workforce in early ed. So thanks to everybody for their continued work in this field, and to the commissioner and her team that continue to work hard on behalf of educators and the children and family of the Commonwealth. On the topic of vaccines in particular, just a reminder to all of us who are engaged in this advocacy and work, the appointment availability is totally tied to the vaccine availability, which is a federal kind of issue. So we just understand that we will continue to support, and I know the agency is working hard to make connections, ensure that the field has the right information, but very big picture, the supply drives the appointments in Massachusetts, and the supply is bound to continue to increase over the next month or so, but I think is at times ebbing and flowing here in Massachusetts, especially this month. We have a great looking agenda in front of us and set of materials. We'll spend a few minutes on routine business, and then we'll move to further discussion of the system overview, again, picking up from long ago, Feb 2019, when we looked hard at that new strategic plan for the agency. Commissioner team will continue to walk us through pieces and in these board meetings, push on the system and today the associated investments and sort of strategy in that domain, as well as now this sort of, how do we monitor progress? How do we understand and articulate what it means to be implementing a strategic plan successfully? What do we hope to see? How do we hope to think about what progress is and how we measure it? And we will close out on the topic of the budget, including the stimulus investment, obviously some great news out of the federal government, very recent on real support for states. And of course, childcare, interestingly, showed up in every and all proposals that related to the stimulus and to relief, a sort of moment of not necessarily bipartisan support in the way that we saw it, but certainly bipartisan insofar as it showed up in every single proposal on both sides of the aisle. And we'll finish on a subsidy rate increase, which is a nice, very nice way to finish a board meeting. So I will now turn it over to the secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be really brief. First, just to reiterate the point that you were making just a moment ago about the vaccine. Obviously, through the president's and the governor's action, the vaccine is now available and for early educators and staff, and will be available for broadly for appointment making starting this Thursday. Obviously, the issues that you rightly identified around supply are going to mean that this is not necessarily going to happen all at once, and it may take a while before everyone gets a shot, but at least that process has now begun. And the governor has also indicated that they'll be setting aside certain weekends for educators and childcare workers to accelerate the process for them in particular, as well as to ensure they have reasonable access so that they're not sort of forced to pull themselves out of a program or out of a school. So fingers crossed, but hopefully this process will get off to a good start, and hopefully the supply will come through sooner than we expect so that we can get to the finish line. The other thing I wanted to sort of mention, which I think all of you are probably aware of, is that last week the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education voted to authorize the commissioner to suspend remote learning in K-12 schools for purposes of meeting the so-called structured learning time requirements. Commissioner Riley indicated at the board meeting, and he'll be confirming today through guidance that's about to be released in probably the next 20 minutes or so, that all districts will be required to bring their K-5 students back into school for full-time in-person learning starting on April 5th, the latest. And importantly, under the newly adopted regulations, parents will continue to have the option of fully remote learning through the end of the school year. So even though all children in grades K through 5 will be invited and offered the opportunity to come back into school for in-person learning, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be required to do so, since the option to remain remote will remain with parents through the end of the school year. Under the guidance that's coming out today, the commissioner will also consider limited waivers for districts that, for whatever reason, cannot meet, or I shouldn't say for whatever reason, but for certain reasons, cannot meet the new requirement by the April 5th deadline. He'll also, I think, be providing a little more guidance or information around middle schools, and in particular, probably clarifying when they're likely to reopen. I think it's likely to be sometime after the end of spring break, as well as the process for high school reopening and what timeline that might be on, although I think that'll probably be announced in coming weeks as opposed to this afternoon. This decision, obviously is important for our public education system broadly, but also has major implications for EEC providers, including the remote learning programs that are currently operating during the regular school day. So school districts will be directed to stay in close touch with all their parents to make sure they have time to make arrangements for their children and for the support services that they need based on the shifting schedules, as well as these remote learning providers to make sure they're given sufficient notice of any change to the school schedule so that they can make adjustments in their own program and can work with their families to make sure there's a smooth transition from the current status quo to whatever the new normal might be for the remainder of the school year in each individual community and district. So with that, Madam Chair, let me turn it back over to you.
Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to reiterate both of your comments, with Secretary and Chair Lisso's comments, in just the nature of where we are right now as we make pivot points in both the way schools are changing and the availability of vaccines. And as we hit the 1-year mark of since we had to close childcare, this obviously is also an exciting meeting to be able to invest in. Excuse me, I think that might be our construction over our head. I hope you can still hear me. But that this is also an exciting time for us to be able to talk about how we will be investing some of the funds that have been provided to EEC from both the state and federal government to be our state and federal legislatures to be able to invest in stability in the field. So just a couple quick updates before we get into the meat of the meeting. I want to let everyone know as we launch the testing sites that we have seen just under 1,200 tests across the 5 to 6 weeks that it has been open. While that isn't an overwhelming number, we know that people are just getting used to this and understanding it, and we are looking into adjusting hours and location and days of the locations based on some of the initial data over the first month and a half or so. On that note, we will be moving the testing over to a state contract after having initially piloted under philanthropic dollars very shortly, which will offer us an opportunity also to move to a Massachusetts laboratory, which will further expedite the turnaround times. I do want to let everyone know, I know that the reason why we piloted was to be able to get up some initial systems up and running, and we have seen that those are up and running over the last 6 weeks, and we are seeing rapid turnaround times and the ability to invest in and make sure that people are getting back to care and to work as quickly as possible. I also wanted to highlight the PPE distribution that we launched around the same time as the testing, just prior to the testing, and just to highlight that this, as the federal government continues to prioritize PPE investment for childcare in various ways, as Chair Lasso said, that this is a system we've been able to set up that has been very successful in being able to alleviate some of the pressures on our programs of being able to address and minimize the time having to seek out, go and pick up, and the fluctuations in costs of PPE that they were experiencing and were monopolizing many operational budgets. So we've heard a lot of good feedback on that and continue to refine the systems to make sure it's more accessible to our small providers. Today, we'll talk a little bit more about the investments, as I said, but I think really as we look ahead at those investments as how we are our strategies to try to stabilize the field, I wanted to make sure that we are also reiterating the vaccination points that both the chair and secretary said around the exciting moment of having access to appointments opened up for our EEC workforce, but also the reality that this will continue to be there will continue to be a need for health and safety strategies at our sites to make sure that that our childcare can remain safe and healthy through the entire period of recovery. And so as we look towards the summer, EEC is really looking to see what kind of supports we can continue to make as these shifts and milestones of recovery happen. We also want to make sure we're providing the resources that we don't let up on the health and safety practices that we perfected over the last year and are really working to maintain, seeing very minimal exposure in our sites and wanting to make sure we maintain that as we learn more about the recovery process on a daily basis. So with that, I'm looking forward to getting to the meeting today, but wanted to give you a little bit of the health and safety context, and as we look to the next months, what will continue to be asked of our providers.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions or comments for the Secretary and Commissioner? Me? Joan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I have two questions. One is, Commissioner, you mentioned looking ahead till summer, which in some ways feels like a long way off, but in other ways feels like it's very short ways away. And I think a lot of parents are going to be so cognizant of what a huge transition this is for kids, particularly for so many of the youngest kids who've been kept home, who may have been eligible for kindergarten, but may have been home or enrolled elsewhere. Is there beginning conversation about summer programming and in particular transition to kindergarten, since that's likely to have a really significant impact on kids in that age group?
Sorry, absolutely. I can let you know some of the work that EEC is doing to support programs in that, but I also would hand to Secretary Pizer to address some of the coordination across, given that this is really a cross-system transition that we're seeing. We are, as Secretary Pizer said, really working to make sure that we're putting our providers in a position to increase communication with schools. So leveraging the DESE guidance around communication with providers to help providers make sure that they can be planful and thoughtful about what transitions children need. As we've looked at the last year of reopening under health and safety standards that are required to maintain healthy facilities, we also see that there are really critical decisions people are having to make every day about adjusting programming and knowing this will continue to take collaboration. And so we will continue to keep our flexible policies, continue to make sure that we have in place the flexibility for our providers to be good partners, and really eager to, as DESE makes this shift towards a new model and a new regulatory framework as was passed by their board this week, that we'll continue to be able to dig into those conversations with the Executive Office of Education. And I'll hand it over to the Secretary if he wants to add anything on that.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add, Joan, is I share your sense of urgency and awareness of the calendar and the ticking clock. We are having active conversations across sort of the whole range of kind of educational programs and programming, both that which has existed in the past and may need to be at a larger scale, as well as new kinds of supports and kinds of services and programs that are unique to the moment that we're in. So I know this won't be helpful to you in a concrete way, but I can assure you we're talking actively about it, and hopefully we'll have something to announce pretty soon.
Well, knowing that you're active on it is actually unto itself very helpful. So thank you for that. I did have just a quick additional question, which is, as folks in the field are eligible for vaccines, not necessarily something that needs or should be done directly by EEC, but I'm wondering whether there is a non-governmental organization that is stepping forward to assist folks who may need help making appointments. Have we heard of anyone stepping into that role, given the language needs and other challenges that folks in the field may face in terms of being able to secure appointments?
So I did notice that, am I muted? Sorry. I can't remember. I did notice that Neighborhood Villages is hosting some webinars. It looked like one was entirely in Spanish, or one of the providers who was speaking was entirely in Spanish. I'm not sure it's as brass tacks as what you're thinking about, Joan, which is like literally support for making the actual appointment. But I did notice that they have a very comprehensive and on the ground session about how to think about, I think to lower the hesitancy and improve and maybe increase people's comfort with the idea, and maybe get some questions answered. That's Neighborhood Villages, but I haven't heard of anything more than that. Commissioner, have you?
Not specific to childcare at this time, but Secretary might have more global. I know that globally accessible resources. I know that there are local collaboratives, and we've been encouraging our workforce to get connected to their local community health center, because those are all places that are designed to be more accessible and will have access, where our workforce will have access to appointments there and vaccinations there as well. And there are a number of strategies I know from the command center deployed across different vaccination access points, but Secretary may have more specific information from that.
I don't have a whole lot more. I mean, my belief is that some of the regional collaboratives which have been established around the state, who do get vaccine and are responsible for distributing it in the communities, they're members of those collaboratives, have a variety of outreach methods. I think they probably vary a little bit from place to place, but nonetheless, that is there. The state has a 211 hotline for anyone who's having trouble working with the online appointment system for whatever reason. I believe, and I can confirm this, that that's available in multiple languages as well. But the people on the other end of those phones are supposed to, work with the person who's calling in to help them. Actually get an appointment done if they can't do it themselves, or they can't do it through the web portal.
The only other thing I'll add that's anecdotal, Joan, but might be worth saying aloud is I have heard anecdotally from folks who are in the nonprofit world that the YMCAs have mounted, the YMCAs that are vaccination sites have done a great job in communities with some outreach and some support. So I just want to throw that out there too.
And I did just confirm the 211 is available in multiple languages, so hopefully it's accessible to most folks calling in.
Thank you.
Joan.
Hi, folks. If I can just go back to Joan's first comment about summer, that we talked a little bit about this last month, but I just want to reiterate about a funding source coming out of EOE to work with a few communities on remote learning. And one of the pieces is really to look at the summer. And also, what I think is really encouraging is that we have an infrastructure across the state through CFCEs to work on transitioning to kindergarten. And I think now it's actually even more critical because of, as you had said, a number of families who chose not to put their kids in kindergarten, and where will they be? So I think this really is an important time to look at what is happening in summer, not to begin to look. We're already looking. And again, it's another opportunity for the early childhood community to collaborate with the public schools and other community agencies in setting up some structures for the short, medium, and long term.
And would those be regional? Is CFCE, is it a regional strategy?
Yeah, there's 88 of them across the, or I think there might be 87 now. We had one switch over, but almost 88 again at the that represent every community, and many of them are public schools, and so there's an opportunity, as Joni was saying, to think about their coordination either across communities or within the community.
Yeah, that might be a structure to leverage. Thank you, Joni.
And it's local, more local, even though there are a number of CFCEs that have multiple communities.
Absolutely.
It's really based on the local needs.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Carolyn.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments and questions. So first of all, I appreciate the update from the secretary on what's going on for K-12 schools. But we also know that EEC's spending has increased by 57% in FY21 for school age children. So I would be interested in hearing about, in particular, this potential waiver system that might exist in terms of, although you said for a limited number of reasons, what's the timeline on that? Because I do think that for our agencies servicing school age children and parents, they're going to need to know what's going to be offered to them and when. And so looking at sort of, our biggest school districts, Worcester, Springfield, and Boston combined are getting over $59 million for this COVID relief most recent package. And so but they've not been providing in-person learning, certainly not for many students. I mean, Boston just started back this month with K-3, and before that, those children have been out of school since March 16th of last year. So I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of, you need to know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen to know whether or not you're going to need to do childcare, or if you're going to have to continue to utilize one of the alternative providers that EEC has supported during this time, where children may continue to need to learn remotely for a period of time. So I'm just interested in hearing that. I know that you said that guidance was coming out today, so I assume that's already been written. If we could get that guidance shared with us, but also to talk about the limited waivers and how those will be allowed or not allowed judiciously. I did listen with great interest to the DESE board meeting the other day on the live stream, and just hearing all of the testimony, particularly from the medical community, about the number of children with increased needs during the pandemic is obviously of great concern. And I will say that we have, in my other roles, we have seen an increase of need for both residential school placements as well as, additional services from EOHHS. So, sorry, that was a long-winded question, but
No, that's all right. And I don't have, too many specific answers. The guidance, again, is literally coming out, I think, probably as we speak, maybe even before I stop talking. And so we'll make sure everyone gets a copy of it right away. It has some detail in it about the waiver process, but it's still, at some level, there's going to be a need to evaluate the requests on a case-by-case basis, depending on the specific circumstances. But I think there is a clear thrust in the guidance that parents need adequate notice of at least 2 weeks before schedules are changed, before schools are reopened. Which is not to say that's an excuse for delaying. It's actually an imperative for quick action. Presumably, most schools and districts have been planning or have existing plans for returning students to school. Those may need to be updated. They may need to be revisited in a variety of ways. But the clear message is, right now, is districts need to move quickly in order to either plan for the full return of elementary school students, at least K-5, by April 5th, if not sooner. Or if they're going to apply for a waiver, they need to move quickly in order to identify what the waiver might be for, and in particular, the extent to which it implies or would require a schedule that's different from, for lack of a better word, the standard schedule, that they are getting that out to parents and programs and the community at large as soon as possible so that people can start to make plans, both for their individual children and for themselves, but also from a program perspective in terms of making sure that there's adequate time to manage those transitions for those students and for the programs themselves.
Thank you. I think it's just important that, obviously in person, full-time, 5 days a week is a major shift, particularly for some districts. I'm just concerned about this because Boston has already said that they're going to do hybrid for the rest of the school year. Now, obviously that conflicts with what's occurred in the last week. So I'm hoping there will be a pushback by DESE with regard to that, because, it's a fairness issue that our providers who have taken on more and more children, and I know many families in Boston have had to utilize providers that they've never had to use before, and whether or not that needs to continue is obviously a big concern for many families. So thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. All right, let's move forward now with our agenda. We'll start with approval of minutes from our February 9, 2021 meeting. Just one correction is that I don't think Allison Schoenwald was present, so we'll get that fixed. Are there other edits that folks have? All right, I'll make the motion that we approve the minutes as amended for February 9, 2021 meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. I'll just use my screen. Start with Carolyn Kane.
Yes.
Allison Schoenwald.
Abstain, wasn't there?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Joni Block.
Yes.
Nikki Ruiz.
Yes.
Eleonora Viegas Reimers.
Yes.
Ian Pizer.
Yes.
David Cruz.
Yes.
Joan Wasser-Gish.
Yes.
Sheila Balboni.
Yes.
Thank you. Approved. All right, I will turn it now over to the commissioner on our first agenda item, which is to go to back out to the system and zero in a little bit on financing and defining quality, which will in many ways kind of frame some of the other pieces very nicely.
Absolutely. And just before we move into the full agenda, I did just want to acknowledge that Mary Wallachie is not here with us today.
Yeah.
I may want to as well, and just to thank her. And we had an opportunity, or the board had an opportunity and included to be able to wish her best retirement. But I wanted to acknowledge that she has opted to go off gracefully and not to be publicly celebrated, but I couldn't help but publicly celebrate the role that she played in my onboarding here, and certainly in getting EEC to this point.
After all that, I'm sorry I missed it, but you're right. We had a great send off. We've had some great correspondence with Mary. We celebrate her 2 terms of work on the board and her 23 years of tremendous work in Springfield as well. And we wish her our very best. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes. Yeah, so thank you, Chair. So wanted to, we're going to start today a little bit of context setting. As I said, I think the bulk of the meeting will be about investments that we're making and the details that we're able to both provide and outline the structure as we wait for additional steps around appropriations. But wanted to context set a little bit around where we are and what the urgency and the shift in how we are looking at finance, what that represents in terms of the field and the landscape that we have in front of us. So as we look at the agenda for today, we'll look over some of that, as I said, the systems overview, specifically dig deeply into the structure of the 2 key investments that we're prepared to start to design and prepare and plan for. I also, as Chair Lasso pointed out, the new federal news over the weekend, and as we head into the week, certainly this, we hope that this will tee us up to both inform and to be more increasingly strategic as we make those next levels of investments. The progress we will then look at some of the ways that the progress monitoring and data collection that we'll be able to do through those grants will help inform our tracking that we looked at in terms of the strategic action plan, and then also then look at some of the immediate investments we'll make into the existing structure as well. So looking on to the next slide, when we've talked to, when we've looked at the reopening data, I'm not going to, this again reiterates a lot of what you all already have known and we have been tracking and seeing, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things in this. Obviously, we know that before COVID, the supply demand issues that the country faced on childcare, access gaps, childcare deserts was pretty significant, and a lot had been written about this nationally, and Massachusetts, when looking at our own data, certainly mirrors some of those national trends that we saw. Then looking at where we are post-COVID, or this point of recovery of COVID, of being able to have over 80% of our programs reopen, but also know that national studies are showing that they're dipping into their retirement, their savings account, just to stay open and viable. And so also looking at that exacerbating some of the supply demand issues that we already saw pre-COVID, and being on the precipice of having a further issue to deal with as we recover and try to get people back to work when you look at the capacity we have. And so we have been, I will say, up until very recently, I had been talking to all of our colleagues nationally about the 80% number, and we were certainly on the trend of the higher end of reopening. And I would say there are many states now that are seeing numbers that start to look more like ours. And so at this point, really wanting to make sure we are strategic in our investment, that we can reopen and invest in new providers to help fill some of the capacity that we will see lost or turnover. It's not all, I think that we're seeing trends as we see people make decisions. This is not all providers who have closed permanently. Some of them have opted not to reopen, but we're also seeing in a field, and again, this is a national trend that we're seeing in Massachusetts as well, in a field where we already had an aging workforce. Many people are also opting to retire or step out of the workforce permanently, that maybe not to get out of the industry, but for reasons that looking at the next couple years ahead became a different decision point for them. And so given the myriad of reasons and ways that we're seeing this play out across regions, we know that our investments have to allow for the flexibility and as well as the stability in programming, so we don't lose any more capacity when we know that, as we go to the next slide, utilization will continue to be volatile. So as you know, we have, we'll skim over the next couple of slides, so we'll go through them quickly because this is all just information to ground us in where and how this investment is designed to address some of the key issues. So as you know, and as we talked about throughout the strategic plan, the funding model for childcare is reliant on enrollment. We either through parent tuition paying based on enrollment, or CCDBG, our subsidies that EEC plays funding enrollment. This has been a case where then you need to maximize enrollment because it is very difficult to sustain a teacher's salary when your cost per child changes by how many children might be in the classroom. We are seeing now a capacity fluctuating and changing that operational budget. The big thing right now is not only are we seeing the enrollment challenges, but we're also seeing these operational capacity challenges even to serve that many children, even if the demand was there. Things that are outside of programs' control. We're hearing every day requests and desperation around recruiting a workforce right now. We're seeing that there is additional costs for providers to maintain that health and safety standards, and that is causing them to look at hours differently and maybe reducing their hours, again, impacting the services and the enrollment during that time. So as we look at then what is this meaning in terms of the actual enrollment, so we see Already at a macro level, we've lost capacity at an already limited capacity for pre-COVID. We see that capacity, even if we could maximize the providers that were left, we're still not able to operationalize that full capacity. As we go on to the next slide, we're also seeing that there are real challenges in for families in being able to access that care, given all of their realities right now, further jeopardizing the business model and the operational model of our providers, and really forcing some real questions around creatively investing, and as every state is grappling with, creatively investing in ways that we haven't traditionally had to, as we were able to make do on a per child model. Financing model. And so here you have, again, just looking at both categories. When we look at the pressures on the private pay families and how families are making decisions around where the care is, based on whether they will be commuting or not commuting, based on whether you can keep an infant home with you perhaps, but maybe not a toddler. How do you really think about the age of care? And families are making very different decisions right now as employment has changed and women's participation in the job market has changed. In addition, when you look at our subsidies, we're seeing the same trends of lower enrollment, and despite the investment we've made in aligning policies so that there are reductions in the barriers that families would face in accessing our subsidies, we're still not seeing that there is the uptake of care that would help sustain the field on a per child model, particularly given the increases in operational costs that we're seeing providers need to, and barriers to open that capacity that our providers are seeing. So again, this is the reality of the context that we are faced when we looked at our strategic plan and thought about the investments that we needed to make in the state and federal dollars that had been entrusted to EEC to distribute to the field. So I'm going to stop there. I think that recaps a lot of what we know, but I'll just take a breath, make sure if there's any thoughts or commentary, I'm happy to take that as we look at the strategy itself.
Okay. I wonder if, given all of the volatility that you managed to capture in a very succinct way, one of the challenges that we've known to anticipate for a while is the fact that it may be that with all the changes happening with school schedules and work schedules, and given the state of the field, that when parents go to look for care, it may not be available. And so I'm wondering if in some of the regular surveys of the field that you're doing, if there's a way to ask about, people's observations of demand versus capacity to serve, as a way for us to get a more centralized snapshot of where that may be happening. Yeah. Because I think there's so much in the context that we won't be able to capture. Like, who knows if the school is opening full-time or hybrid, if this, the school has on-site aftercare or not. Like, there's just going to be so much that we won't be able to understand. But in terms of being able to be proactive in helping to fill gaps and just sort of putting families at the center for a moment, are there questions or data or actions that EEC can be thinking about strategically to help navigate this? Because this is just going to be another hard period for families to get through.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think what we are, so one of the huge challenges we have, as you know, is that everyone knows, that is the enrollment of non-subsidized, getting good information on utilization of non-subsidized children. We just don't track that. We had started to get very diminished returns on our survey. And so we I think people got into a little bit of fatigue, so we can re-up some of it, but the information was spotty. So we are looking at a couple different things that we'll talk about through the data capture we will do from the financing that we'll put into the field that will help us inform some of that. But I think we're also looking to rely on some outside support for that. Of looking at, been working with the Bipartisan Policy Center in the New England region to look at what work demands and what industry shifts we can expect to see based on the way industries are thinking about work that will help impact or will be a huge driver for families, the constraints families are functioning under in terms of work, and be able to help look at some of that. They are also doing a national family survey and are looking to oversample New England and Massachusetts specifically, and learning things about family preference as well. Knowing we had challenges, for example, with non-standard work hours prior to COVID, and there were pilots going on to figure out how do you serve industries that don't fit into the traditional childcare model, like construction, where hours start very early. How do you use flexibility on and the intimacy provided in a family childcare setting that can help accommodate one or two children's schedule differently? And those were all questions I think that were percolating before. So trying to understand that work and where and how family preference, and particularly now that health and safety is such an issue, where that's driving some of the preference is another really key component that I think we will need to do as we look at stabilizing the field. What we also know is stabilizing it, and we keep saying this, to go back to what we had is probably not going to sustain us to what we need in the future. And that's sort of the data that we're trying to build around this as well.
If I could just mention too, Commissioner, I think the resource and referral agencies represent a very important resource in terms of just looking at data when assessing family need, family preferences, supply and demand.
Yeah, and we have been, Sheila, thank you for that. We have been working to try to build some consistent data sets. You can see in what we've been providing here of just sort of where some of the CCR&R work has focused, and so we'll continue to leverage them as well. And I think that's actually some of the investment that was made in the CCR&Rs this year. We did try to support and encourage some of those kind of investments that would help us track some of improved access for families as well. Other questions? Okay. So I am going to, you've seen the next couple of slides at the last board meeting, so I'm just grounding us in what we're trying to achieve here as we get to the strategy. As you all will remember, and as I've been talking to staff and teams internally about our work, we spent a few months going through each of the pillars of the strategic plan, and a very big acknowledgement that when we developed the strategic plan, there was reference and thought about the financing structures, but really with the intention that there were systems to build around these three critical pillars of our stakeholders and work, and that we would be building those and thinking about the financing structures. Then COVID happened, and we're in a position now where with the state and federal investment, we have an opportunity to try to look at those financing structures and learn something that can teach us about what kind of stability we could build over time, but really do that in targeted short-term investments provided by key budget lines that will help us really think differently at a time where we are being required to think differently quickly in order to sustain this capacity. So you see here how we have added and talked about financing as now one of the key pillars of the plans, specifically as that opportunity has arose, and now making very critical decisions around each of these other key components of EEC's work about how we will prioritize certain activities that may have been a 2-year plan, but now we need to think quickly about what we can abandon, what we can reduce burdens for programs while we make these financing investments. And so as we've done that, I just want to highlight 2 quick things as we slide over these. So obviously the financing, but the programs, we are redoing our regulations. We're really looking at how can we reduce burdens to operate programs without pulling back back on the very high, rigorous quality standards we have embedded in our licensing regulations. And so our licensing regulations, and many colleagues across the country, as I talk with them around, strategies around improving quality, some of the work you all have done leading up, thinking about leadership at the in licensed programs and how we foster and develop instructional leadership. Many of our colleague states will say, how can you do that on licensing, with giving examples of the licensing, their licensing standards that are so far below where we are, that it's understandable that the leap to high quality is very high. We are not in that position. We have, Massachusetts has built a very strong foundation for quality across our systems for programs, and making sure that we're leveraging that and trying to foster and support programs in achieving that, while also trying to move away from a point in time quality, but really thinking about those kind of supports, the ongoing mentality, and really right now the kind of investment in process as opposed to measurement that will really help ensure that our programs have the support they need to pivot quickly, think differently, and do that in a way that holds true to that integrity of quality for children and families. We also know, and I just want to caveat this as much as we can, we also know that the country has really has some work to do to make sure that our family childcare strategies are specific and targeted to this model that Massachusetts holds, has a huge footprint in, and a system to build from, and really thinking through, as I've gotten to know that model significantly better over the last year, a year and a half, of understanding the nuances of the family childcare that only serves early childhood, the family childcare that only serves school age, and the really true mixed age models, and all of those of how you look at quality in there. And then also, I just say this final thing about our programs, of really making sure that we're investing in their ability, as we invest in our programs, and their ability to manage those funds, and not setting them up, setting our programs who may not have MBAs up for failure of having to grapple with public dollars. So that's also another investment we're making, to make sure there's some resources for people to continue to grapple with the programming as we make these investments. So moving on to the other two pillars, I'm going to focus a little bit on programs, since our investments today that we're going to talk about in financing strategies are really targeted to that program strategy, but just wanted to highlight that the work across educators and families continues to move forward, and we'll continue to talk about those as well, and have done some really robust engagement, starting some of initial conversations on this that are going extremely well, and gotten some really great feedback. So how we're looking at quality and programming, I think if we move on to the next slide, one of the key things that we're looking at is, if we are going to have the funding that we're providing to stabilize programming, what we want to do is start to use this as an opportunity to think differently about the kinds of quality we're investing into. This slide is, I think, when you look back at the systems slide, what you don't see on our program work is a revision of the QRIS. Right now, we're really trying to think differently about the QRIS, using the principles and foundation that you all had developed over the years prior to COVID, and really thinking about, how do you operationalize the capture of a mindset and a process of an investment of quality, the routines of collaboration, and the data integration of child assessment into reflective practice. How do you try to measure that much more so than a point in time that you're able to achieve and move on? Having been through this myself, I will say, in different centers, it's a challenge. It's great to polish up and put up for one day to say that we have done this, but it is hard to say, to be able to protect the time on a daily basis, to make sure that there's an opportunity for teachers to step away, that you're encouraging and thinking and thoughtfully looking at how data can be utilized to drive instructional design, when teachers are tired and grappling with a lot. And so how do you really think intentionally about that kind of adult learning and adult practice is it takes much more than a point in time measurement. And so what we're really trying to start thinking about in implementation of looking at a CQIP as opposed to a point in time application is focusing on how do we create some aligned tools, invest in those tools for programs to utilize, but also ensure that those tools can be leveraged by our professional development providers, our higher education institutions, trying to think about how do you align around a conversation about what children should be experiencing in a program, as opposed to the program's ability to demonstrate an application or a capture of that. These are hard questions. We have just started to really dig deep with the field, but our first step this year was to let go of the QRIS application and really focus on, if we are going to spend programs time on quality this year, to focus them on an ongoing plan that we can help think about supporting, coaching, and working with, as opposed to trying to get an application together, which we are hearing that needs some support, and people were already overburdened with the staff, the operational challenges of operating in COVID. All of the benefits of our quality add-on, all of that will still be available in with the CQI once a CQIP is in place. And it's just the initial step. This isn't the end game for us, but being able to let go of the application, focus on process, and start to think about what kind of tools we would build going forward that could help all of us align around what that CQIP, that continuous quality improvement plan, actually should be organized around, that everyone can use and have a similar access. And it's not the program's responsibility to negotiate multiple technical assistance, but our responsibility to come together and agree and be able to work off the same plan. So that is, I say that in this initial step, but I felt it was important as we talk about the financing and the investment and stability. We're also talking about some of the ways EEC is looking to capture and understand what that should be investing in very differently from the QRISs of the past. I will say one more thing, and Jody, I see your hand, and I'll make sure, but I wanted to say that I think there's a sentiment, as I've talked to many of my colleagues across the country around some of this, is the investments and the acceleration of quality rating and improvement systems over the last 10 years has really helped us push the metric, push the envelope on how we think about quality, but also has had a gap in how we actually ensure that the people on the ground who are doing the work have the investment to really understand how the change, the behavior change it takes to be able to do that. And that takes investment in them, and not just coaching and resources, but actually making sure that the program has the financial resources to be able to invest in the humans that are doing this human service and education. Joni, yeah.
So thank you. So I am very encouraged to hear you talking about quality in this context. And I think it provides us as a department and us as a field with the opportunity to look at what we've done over the years, many, many years since the inception of EEC, in terms of some initiatives we took, and we did step one and stopped and then did something else, that we can look back and we might not have a strong database, but we have experience in looking at some of these tools. When we looked at some of the UPK initiatives, we really focused on reflective practice, formative assessment, curricular instruction and assessment, and really tried to align those pieces. And I think that our colleagues in the field will be very encouraged and supportive that we're looking at it again, and it's kind of a known quantity, and the work that they did can be built upon. So
yeah,
thank you for forming it that way.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that affirmation. I think that this is, it really is around the how do you try to support the time and energy and capacity it takes to really build that reflective practice, which we know is so critical to supporting people who are doing and in the trenches, really working every day to be emotionally responsive to children, present and capacity, and build capacity with families to be able to navigate the the new world of parenting for many families.
I wonder too, Commissioner, in keeping with your thought that different communities and different agencies will be ready to sort of move ahead with this quality program at different times, depending on their current status and well-being. I wonder, have we thought about developing any pilot programs to move this agenda forward?
Well, with this one, this is more of letting go of the old QRES and less of something new at this point. So we haven't really thought about specifically about anything, piloting anything specific until we sort of figure out exactly where we're going to land. I think certainly very open to trying to pilot when we figure out what we're going to land. But I think that one of the first things that it might be, Sheila, is coming up with some common frameworks for what we I've said this in talking to many stakeholders over the last month as we've been sort of formulating what the impact of this be and how we think about it. One of the challenges we have of being able to walk in and know its quality. But how do you translate that to someone who has no idea what they're looking for, and that how do you one of the things I always say to people is, to parents particularly, is if you go in and you bond with the person and you feel like this is where, that is almost as important in some ways, because it's about a mindset and an approach, and feeling like that approach is there, but that's hard to capture. So we're trying to figure out some tools that might be able to capture that mindset and approach, as opposed to your ability to do that. And the first step of that is to try to let go of the application that was that we were hearing was had a lot of administrative steps, but wasn't able to capture some of that mindset as we tried to figure out what tools and then potentially pilot them for sure.
And I wonder too, in regard to tools, are we thinking about coaching and developing internal systems to support coaching within organizations and programs?
Absolutely. I think coaching is the key component of this. I think one of the gaps that we hear a lot, and even when we talk to higher ed stakeholders, leadership at site levels, family child care systems, PDCs, all of the resources we have around various forms of coaching and mentoring for professionals in the field, is one of the things that would be incredibly helpful is that common framework. Because again, they're all working. I had this experience in Chicago, and I use this not because it's profound, but because I think it really does resonate when you're a director at a center and the family is coming in to yell at you and the kid is puking or, had chicken pox or whatever, and the teacher had to call out because their child. The idea that we're also trying to negotiate all of like what is quality and how we think about this is incredibly overwhelming. And so the easier we can make it of creating a common language, what we would see a lot in Chicago is we had multiple different technical assistance resources. This was through Head Start. So, we had components of the framework that we invested in. And we would have people say, I can't do education because I'm doing instruction, or I can't, and really realizing that our work to align just our simple vocabulary was really meaningful in having people not having to translate in real time what we were trying to help support them to do. And so I think some work on our end, Sheila, on that point of building a framework and making sure all of our coaches, that whether it's a coach the coach model or whether it's the coach themselves, have some common language, some common framework to understand what we're trying to achieve, I think will be a huge benefit to make sure all of our coaching can be experienced consistently and felt as a cohesive whole, as opposed to pieces, scattered pieces to those professionals working on the ground. It's definitely the hope. But it's going to take a lot to build. And I think the QRISs, as I talk to other states, there aren't a lot of other states that don't have some sort of an application of some kind, and really thinking about out point blank, the expense that is for a provider and us to look at the application, and are there other more efficient ways that we could try to really think about tool utilization as opposed to outcomes of a tool as part of a mindset approach, and hopeful that with digging deeper with our providers, with all of the stakeholders that are there to help support, that as we couple that with a financing investment, we all of a sudden are urgently trying to get out into the field, that we're not losing the opportunity to build some of that conversation about what we hold true as children's experience in those well-financed programs. Any other thoughts as we go on to the financing specifically? I will say we have in reinforcement, finally, as we move on to the financing, we've just started to engage the field. As I said, we've done some amazing, the teams have done some really incredible webinars with, I think I mentioned last time, this software that provides real-time feedback from the field. We can ask questions and have a dialogue with really large groups of people in really interesting ways, and have gotten resounding, overwhelming support for the idea that what we should be looking at is that teacher-child interaction, that adult-child interaction, and how we can frame around that. Now, that is a lot to unpack and understand, and certainly something we've been trying to do and understand the constructs around, but gives us an opportunity to dig deeper with the field, think about constructs, think about utilization of tools that could help us do that across different models and settings, things that have validity, but also are ease of use so they don't become overburdened, and what kind of investment we would have to make as a system to make any of that effective, because it's not just having the tool and requiring it, it's actually providing the resources to understand it and operationalize it that will make that successful. So looking at the financing model. So I'm going to give you this overview of what we're looking at, and then we'll dig deep into each of the first two structures that we're proposing. So as we pointed out in the landscape, we have right now moving away from a per child model. So while we know that our subsidies have to be addressed, when you look at our caseload and you look at the field as a whole, our increasing our per child subsidy rates weren't going to be able to address the very large operational challenges we're seeing as an overall system right now. So as we are looking to see how do we save that capacity, but also, to Joan's point, start to be able to put providers in a position to be able to respond to new family needs that we don't even know exactly what they are yet. And we are looking to engage with business and think about the new business coalitions engagement and understanding where and how employers are making decisions, but that's real time, and they don't have those decisions necessarily made either, as we all respond to evolving data and vaccination landscapes and everything coming very quickly at us. And so want to make sure as we try to aggregate some of that and disperse it, and thoughtful in how our regulations can foster creativity. We also need to make sure that that we provided programs with the ability to evolve and meet that new need of the Commonwealth. So we're looking at a 3-phase approach here to begin with that third phase being further defined this weekend than it was last week with the the passage of the Senate bill. So there's a little bit of it's a little bit vague on that third one, but I think once we talk through the first two, you'll see where that can go. And given the structure we know of in the federal bill, will continue to allow us to fuel and foster and learn from this type of approach. So the operational reserve, the FY21 budget that we currently have in our appropriated to EEC, contained both the parent fee reserve that we looked at last time in terms of and voted on continuing to pay our parent fees through the new implementation of the new model. It included the rate reserve, which we'll talk later, and it included the operational reserve, which is a fund that, given the fluctuations in our caseload account and the structure of the caseload account being per child funding only, this allowed any money not spent on the per child to be over the course of the fiscal year to be deployed in alternative ways to the field to address workforce and compensation issues, as well as program sustainability issues. That investment was pre-populated with it was appropriated with some funding before the transfer would happen from the caseload account. So we're looking to get that funding out to the field as quickly as possible, hitting on some of what we're hearing is the most egregious pain points and some of the advocacy that had been provided to us throughout the COVID around hazard pay and payments for individuals who are working in our programs. So we have that will look at workforce investments and family childcare, home investments, and then really what we will begin to get some good data that will help us inform the federal stimulus investment. We'll talk about that in a second, but of course that we do not have appropriated yet. We are, the federal government has allocated our share of the stimulus that passed in January, but that does still have to go through the state appropriations process for EEC to fully disperse the funds. However, we are quickly trying to plan and be proactive. So when that does happen, the legislature, the governor, and all of our stakeholders and EEC systems are able to deploy quickly the funding that we know our programs so desperately need. We also still will continue, as I started at the beginning, of thinking about our parent fees, our PPE investment that we have been making, as well as testing and some other systems-wide investments that we've been making to defray the operational burden on programs that are better taken at the system level. And then finally, looking at our models for FY22 as the legislature considers the budget appropriation process for the state and the funds that are in the next federal stimulus package or stability package become clearer of exactly how we can appropriate, we can allocate them. We will continue to refine, but this gives us the opportunity to grow that. So moving on to the next section, I am going to look at the two grant programs specifically that we are able to, we are 2 different points and are able to start to talk about. So the first one, again, a lot of information on this page. So we wanted you all to have all the details. We wanted the field to have the details and be able to see it. I'm not going to read all of these. I'm going to hit the highlights and then can answer some questions. We quickly have been working to be able to get these funds prepared and out the door. We hope in the next, by the end of the month, we will have an application up for people to be able to apply to these for these funds. On the center-based side, again, really hearing this, the funding appropriated by the legislature is required to go to subsidized programs who receive subsidized and have some subsidized enrollment. And so you have that list, the number here. What we're looking to do is try to get a capacity, make it simple with funding that is provided based on the licensed capacity, equating that with the number of staff members likely needed, and be able to put some requirements that support staff specifically, knowing that many of our providers have been trying to get hazard pay, vacation, mental health pay, be able to provide some paid vacation when people need a break, those kind of things, and have been have found it very difficult to do so given the operational pressures. Again, this is a targeted amount of money, and so trying to make sure it is meeting a targeted goal is part of the key component here. And secondly, we'll look at the family childcare. As we talked with family childcare specifically and looked at the construct of the funding, it's a little bit harder to give family childcare workforce funding given the structure of many of their businesses, and that every family childcare is often set up as a slightly different kind of business, independent contractor, sole proprietor. There's all different designations. In talking with them, what we heard was that it is difficult for them every time they have to make these health and safety investments. They're taking it out of their own salary or revenue. So how could we help defray some of those so that they were able to keep more of their revenue as salary? We provide some flexibility on that to make sure we could meet the full range of needs of the program, but really looking across those two areas to target those funds to the people who, as you all have pointed out many times, have been in-person supports for families that have needed that over the last year. So really try to make sure that that workforce is the targeted goal here. The other thing we will do that I'll point out is start to build some reporting requirements. Will help us look at things like salary and number of staffing and questions that we know will be asked as we look at our next phase of investment, but also set up, this funding is compared to the federal funding coming down the line, is a massive amount of funding compared to our previous grants, and not nearly as much as we will be asked to, our fiscal team will be asked to do over the next year. And so we also are very thoughtful about how we use this to set up a process with an intermediary that can help make sure that we can do this with fidelity, we can do this with integrity, and we don't do it in a way that either really hurts EEC staff long-term and overburdens EEC staff, but I think also make sure that we can pivot quickly, knowing that we've been relying on pieces of our system that haven't necessarily been able to, that haven't necessarily had the funding or staffing to pivot quickly. So trying to make sure we're setting up our ability to set up the next system. So that intermediary will help us with grant collection, application collection, data collection, and analysis so that we can make very smart decisions iteratively over the course of the next 6 months. So looking at the next slide, we're talking about the stabilization funds, and I'll outline this and then I'll pause and happy to take any questions on these ones. So as I pointed out, the federal stimulus funds are waiting for appropriation from the state. And so this is a planful approach. We are looking to use a formula that would help provide some transparency, some consistency, and really the efficiency to be able to support programs at an operational level as opposed to a child enrollment level. And so we look at, again, this would go to all licensed providers. We would look to structure it as a operational stipend that would defray operational costs with flexibility on how that could be defined by the program, knowing that programs have taken on many different types of operational creativity during this time and thus operational burdens. We look to do it as a monthly disbursement that would help us be able to track along the way the progress and the impact we're having. And as I mentioned, as we look at a federal package that is making its way through Washington now, that is 4 times as much as this one we are spending, that we are also preparing and thinking about where we real time and not waiting until the end, real time, what we might need to do with that next federal package, that next federal stimulus dollars in terms of sustaining capacity and stabilizing. I will say, of all the language that I have seen, and we were in active conversations with many people who were informing that legislation. It really is designed to foster this kind of approach where you are offering operational dollars not based on enrollment to the field to stabilize with some sort of expectations, of operations, of continued operations. And so really feel confident that the way we've set this up will allow us to learn, but also build very quickly and eliminate any huge delays between federal packages as we try to get the money out the door for people. I also wanted to just talk a little bit about the formula itself. We are in the process of getting feedback on the formula and trying to understand how it would look. It will be something that we're trying to think Commonwealth-wide and thinking about really what are the dynamics and components of caring for children that would help us really think about making sure that we're incentivizing the right kind of activities that are the robust educational care that we know our programs are providing. And so looking at the operations, targeting components of a formula that will inform operations, of looking at the size of the program, very different to run a 20 classroom center than a family childcare home. And so really understanding the size as a key component here. Looking at the cost to support quality operations. I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. We know right now that the cost to sustain operations is so heavily about staffing, particularly where you can't mix group sizes or grant groups, so that you need 3 teachers dedicated to a classroom right now, or you need additional with remote learning, additional family childcare assistants with our and to serve the same number of children. And so, the operational cost of taking on an additional salary to operate the same amount of slots is pretty significant. So not sure how we will reflect this, but really, really thinking about that staffing as a key component of this as we look at this metric. And we know many programs are thinking and grappling with this. So how do we help make sure we're supporting that really critical decision? And then also knowing that the community served and how that looks has to be defined, but is a vital component of this. We want to protect providers to be able to serve vulnerable populations. We want to make sure that as we are investing in the capacity of childcare, it is accessible to families that may not be able to pay the highest market rate, but still really actually need access to care. We need to think about all of that. And as we do on it, that is where we are digging deep with the field too. We won't be using subsidized enrollment as a proxy for serving vulnerable populations because of all of the myriad of issues that we've been talking about over the last months. The extensive wait list, the 25% reduction in our enrollment over the last few months, all of the challenges that we have across the board, and the fact that we have this funding is going to everyone. But we are committed to finding a proxy for serving vulnerable communities and families that will be meaningful and relevant to the field as it is right now. And we have been working with third sector capital partners that will help make sure that we are engaging the field in a robust way and really digging deep into what kind of data points we could use here that would be reflective of the full mixed delivery model and the full suite of regional differentiation we have across our programs. Let me say just 2 really quick things on this. One, we have been coordinating with the New England states, and you all have, and is posted online, our full federal proposal that we put in collaboration with the New England states, or application. This was sort of an administration holdover, so we the criteria is still in evolution, and so we were able to put down, because we were at the the head of thinking at the New England region around how we would collaborate on this. We were able to put a regional approach together and then differentiate within each of our states of how that would be applied. That became a real conversation point during this last negotiation on the stimulus package. So I think we've been able to show the flexibility we need, and that by using that flexibility, we're all able to conform to some basic principles, which you see in the elements of the formula, but also really individualized. I finally want to just say, you have the timelines here. Very much dependent on the appropriation process. We are committed, as I said, to keeping on track to getting our formula identified, solidified, bought in, and engaged with the field on it, making sure we have it right, getting our systems in place so that when the appropriation is solidified, we're able to deploy the funds. We had been intending that about 80% of the funds would go out to the field this way, and that there would be a certain amount of funds we'd hold back. Again, PPE, testing some of those system-wide investments with the new federal package. When we hear details on that, we obviously will look at all of those together in collaboration. So that is the big news and conversation for today. We'll get to some of the research and things we want to look at in this in the next couple of minutes. But I want to highlight where we go from here. So this is the financing structure. We'll be looking at having an intermediary to help us make sure we are doing this well, get the money out the door, and learn along the way, which will require us to collect information and be able to, and we're committed to making sure it's not too much of a burden, but that will be how we are in a position to make sure that we are refining and tweaking anything that needs to be tweaked to be able to achieve the goal of stability, be able to achieve the goal of ensuring that our workforce is invested in while we look ahead to summer, fall, and beyond with the financing that continues to evolve. So I'm going to pause there, and before we talk about the metrics and what we'll be looking at in the next section, see if this makes sense. Any questions? It's a lot of information, and I didn't read it verbatim, so let me know if there's anything else to highlight.
I had a question, Commissioner, regarding the formula approach to distributing the stabilization grant. I wonder, does family income and generally, so the level of poverty or income, do families have any bearing on how this will, per program, have any bearing on how this will be distributed? In other words, will programs that serve the most needy children, regardless of, subsidies or not, will they be given some sort of priority?
So not priority, because everyone will get something, but level of funding will depend on this formula. So we are looking into, yes, I think, Sheila, exactly as you said, either community served or population served. And those, I think we have deeper analysis to do to figure out what data points best capture that. Is it pre-COVID services? Is it the demographics that are likely to use your services at the municipality you're in now that people aren't traveling quite as much and so we don't really know what the best proxy is right now. This last week, we started to get some feedback on the field of what we could use aside from subsidized enrollment, and need to dig much farther in. But questions like, how far are families in your community traveling for childcare? It's a difference in a suburban urban question than in Western Mass, where you have smaller communities that may need to travel outside their community. And there's a whole bunch of myriad of issues. And so we're trying to figure out exactly how do you capture community and population served so that you can reflect the need of the population served in the level of funding that is distributed in the formula.
Mm-hmm. So equity considerations will remain a principle in how we deal with this.
Absolutely. And I think the tool that we've built on, once we have data points to start to insert and hypothesize around, actually does look at that exact equity. It does look at a few different equity dimensions. So we can bring that back and talk about what some of the trade-offs might be if we look at one data point over the other over the next couple months. And I think the one other thing I'll say is that just as we are here, you know, we're able to commit with the stimulus dollars that we have now, but I think this will also give us an opportunity to refine, did we get it right, if we need to make tweaks as we look to the next federal package too.
Two quick comments, Commissioner. One, in the very short run, I don't know if this is too much in the weeds, but it strikes me that some stipulation around a plan for trauma-informed practice may be really maybe warranted and kind of builds off what Sheila's talking about. There's a point at which if we look at that data coming out of Children's Hospital, but we use also our common sense when we think about Carolyn's point, which is it's way too much isolation among too many children, right? Mental health is really on the rise, but it was a crisis before the pandemic. So just thinking about that in terms of in that third category in the funding, you know, community population served maybe with some accountability to at least articulate an approach to the trauma-informed piece.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really important. I think, and it does talk to appropriate accountability for these dollars too. And we look at the population served. You know, if you're just, it's not just can you get more money for that, but what are the services that go along with that money? Because the reason why there are higher dollars, you know, to Charlotte's point, that the reason why there are more dollars is because there are more services needed, and so it's more costly to provide those services and more resources and referrals. So how do we target that is going to be a key question there.
Yeah, the behavior.
I think that, and also the fact that the literacy gap certainly has been exacerbated by the whole experience children have gone through during COVID, and particularly low-income children.
Yeah, the only other comment I'll make that's big picture, but I'm just flagging it since we're talking in part about the system and in part about post-pandemic. I was reading closely the McKinsey report on the future of work post-COVID, and one of the glaring and way accelerated trends is on this automation. And so it raises all kinds of issues of upskilling. So their biggest punchline is the amount of upskilling that will be needed post-pandemic is unprecedented for the countries in such a short period of time. So I just want to flag that because, you know, I don't think we're always great at tying the higher ed, vocational, and even employer-based upskilling to childcare. But I think in the new normal, in the next normal, it would, and with if these kinds of dollars persist, would be great for EEC to think about getting in the mix on some of this upskilling work.
That's very helpful, and I think and you know, David Cruz and I had a conversation. You know, he's involved in some of the mass hire work, and so I just started really thinking about how do we coordinate with some of those Massachusetts specific resources that are trying to invest in exactly that kind of approach and strategy. And I think working with the other secretariats to understand how and where we can invest, that will be key.
Yeah, and in the near term, what I took away, and I don't know, this is not specific to Massachusetts itself, but in the near term, it suggested also just very persistent unemployment for certain groups because of this. So just flagging that.
Yeah. Carolyn.
Hi. So I don't know if I'm reading this correctly or not, but so I know one of the biggest challenges, and you've already noted this, is with the workforce, right? I've heard from a number of providers saying that it's really difficult finding people and quality people because of the rates that they're able to pay, right? I mean, people are still getting that additional money on top of unemployment And then we're competing with, Starbucks, for wages. So I guess I'm just wondering in terms of this investment, how is the workforce issue being addressed, or am I not seeing that correctly?
Yeah, well, the first step I think is the previous grant, which will be specifically to the workforce, right? So that money has to be specifically spent on workforce issues. On this one, I think what we're looking at is operational dollars with, to the chairman's point, around additional dollars that have some accountability of making sure you sustain staff, that that investment in staff is adequate. But I think, Carolyn, the challenge of being able to recruit staff is huge in the field right now. And the salaries that are being
Right.
offered are not the salaries of pre-COVID childcare. They are equivalent to, levels that as much as, an entry-level K-12 teacher, for example, in a school district might make. And we're still not able to recruit adequate workforce. And so I think that is where more creative strategies have to be, that it's not just money alone, right? It's not
Yeah.
just this investment. And we hope that operational dollars, knowing that so much of the operational financing is required just to support staff, that we hope that helps. But we'll also need to be thinking about far deeper and bigger strategies to get a pipeline of workforce, because that's what we're hearing. Job boards, college, higher ed, there's just no one wants to come in.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously this is not the only place where workforce challenges exist. They're sort of across the board at this point. I just think of sort of like in allocating money, so to sustain operations.
Yeah.
You don't really have an operation if you don't have the people to work there. So just looking at both pieces, because I do think that that's been a struggle, and definitely increased with the pandemic because of a whole host of concerns. It's not any one particular thing, but obviously having not only a competitive wage, but also sort of a career path available to you as a result of that. I just was concerned about the workforce piece because it's just come up over and over again, and I do just wanted to see how that was included in the allocation of funds.
Yeah, I think our formula will try to look at the number of staff that are on salary, basically, or staff, because the difference between investing in 2 teachers per classroom and 3 teachers per classroom to sustain a cohort and sustain hours is a huge operational cost. So trying to reflect that kind of investment in the formula is one way. And then this question of again, having accountability on making sure that salaries and staff is maintained through the investment. But you can't force a staff member to stay. And so that's the challenge we have, is that if people are leaving, that there's only so much our formula can help highlight. So
would the grant have the flexibility to allow the providers to sort of target what they feel would be most beneficial to them?
In terms of investment?
Yeah.
And we'd look to try to prioritize workforce, but we haven't heard any pushback from prioritizing, as long as there's still flexibility to invest in all of the operational costs. And so, we'll continue to explore what that means and how you do that, and making sure we're not penalizing people, but it's addressing the very big challenges they have.
Thank you.
Joan, did you want to?
Thanks. So I want to kind of build on the direction that Caroline just opened up in terms of really thinking about how these dollars are going to function at the program level, but kind of within the broader context. So we obviously want to see these investments advance program stability as a precursor for advancing quality and the field as a whole. And we want to think about these grants in the context of some of the other monies that are coming in at the program level, particularly for subsidized providers, right? We're going to see hopefully a rate increase. We're going to see a different, more stable stream of funding around parent fees. So all of these sort of new dollars are coming in to a program. And at the same time, we know that the context in which programs are operating is wildly unpredictable, right? And so how do we ask the right questions to really understand what these dollars allow programs to accomplish, accounting for the fact that enrollments are really fluctuating. Hiring staff is really hard. The K-12 context is, unpredictable. There could be unexpected closures. There's going to be, folks who are open part-time, not full-time. All of these things that are going to be so critical to program stability. And also, one of the questions that we have to explore is, what's the right magnitude of investment to enable programs to make a difference? And how do we understand that in this context where all of these, costs are so uneven? So I guess my question is really, how do we seize the opportunity to understand the role of these dollars within this broader context so that we can continue to make smart investments that allow ultimately for that stability and movement to quality?
Yes, I think that is exactly a great place to transition to the next section as well, because that's some of our proposal is around the data collection. Because as you know, Joan, we have limited amount of data on those levers or the impact that the levers we're pulling may have on the program as a whole. We can look at our subsidies, and we certainly are trying to get a better data infrastructure to look at trends in our subsidies, and that's some of the work that we'll continue to invest in. But it is a huge question around the workforce. We couldn't tell you how the turnover is happening. We have to start to look at that to be able to answer some of these questions. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm just going to sort of hit on, and you have this in the appendix, so I won't spend time on this. I want to give it to Jocelyn, hand over to Jocelyn to talk deeper, I think, Joan, exactly into the questions you're asking is, what will we be looking at to see, is it working or not real time? And to spend a little bit more time looking at where we're headed on that. So you have here things we had been looking at pre-COVID that we think will be key indicators, but these are sort of our annual look of where we would look to see is progress made and have we invested in the right things. What we know is we have these real-time opportunities to look and think around what these investments are doing, and are thinking about and planning for real-time data collection that will help us do that. So if we go to the next slide, I'll hand over to Jocelyn to just talk quickly through where we will be looking at some data points and how we'll need to invest and continue the investment you all have endorsed in technology to make sure we're getting those real time and informing the system before we're years down the road.
So because of the staged nature of the funding allocation, we have an opportunity to also think very carefully about how we stage the data collection. So with the workforce grants and the FCC grants going out, we can use both the current systems that we have in place to collect data and also the opportunity for grant reporting to gather information about how programs are using their funding, impacts on their budgets, the ways in which programs are currently staffed, and trying to track whether there are any changes as a result of the investment. And it's also going to help us understand how programs spend the money, which I think is particularly important, recognizing that short-term funding is not something we would expect to change salaries immediately. So we want to understand the effective ways that programs can invest in their staff through funding that has a time duration. And then so that information gathered from the grants can then inform the stabilization grants and how we structure those grants and think about the funding formula. Through those grants, we can then develop a more longer term reporting strategy where we're getting information back from programs regularly. We're increasing programs' investment and engagement in our current reporting systems, and really thinking about how we're tracking expenditures, the impacts on budgets, staffing, salaries, enrollment, and potentially even tuition rates, so that we're trying to get a better systemic understanding of how this investment is shaping some of these key aspects of programs. At the same time, recognizing that every data point we collect is a burden for EEC programs to report. So we need to balance simplicity with the most important information that we have to collect. Next slide.
Can I just ask, is it too impractical to include children at all? I know it, maybe it's just too aspirational to even suggest, but there, what is the effect of this program on children, on their literacy levels? Is that just too fine-tuned at this point?
That strikes me as something that might be better served through some sort of a piloting approach, or thinking about a small scale study built within the context of a larger rollout. It's expensive to assess child outcomes. So I think we just would need to be targeted and careful about thinking about how we would take something like that on. We can also track the relationship between some of these investments and changes in programs that we would expect to shape child outcomes, and understand some of the mechanisms that we are affecting through this investment.
Right. But to Joan's point, previous point, this may be an opportunity to take a look at that in some very discrete instances.
Yep. No,
Yeah.
definitely something for us to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so and this is just highlighting the system, the IT system investment. As per the discussion a few minutes ago, we really do recognize and receive the board's recommendation that we should be investing in our systems, and these systems are going to be essential for the type of ongoing monitoring that the commissioner was discussing. Currently, we have program characteristics in it. We also have a consumer website that includes some program reported information about tuition rates and operating hours, but these all provide opportunities to increase engagement in providing this type of information through systems that already exist. In FY22, we're going to continue to build Outlead, in particular to think about collecting CQIP engagement data points like the use of tools. There is the opportunity to expand CCFA to track enrollment beyond just subsidized children, so it's an option that we're looking at. And we can continue thinking about reporting requirements. And then in 22, we're also building a registry, which would provide a more stable place to collect staffing information and ongoing tracking of staffing and salaries. And we are working with a team from Third Sector Intelligence to build a dashboard that will provide for ongoing analysis of childcare subsidy utilization. So each of these pieces, I think, as the grant rollout happens, we can, as IT systems come online, fold some reporting into systems that exist rather than having a separate reporting process over time.
So Joan, I think just to highlight that your point of what are we collecting real time, here are some of our initial thinking. Of course, the exact limitations of our technology system and that balance between burden versus information that will drive policymaking, I think is where we're here right now, knowing that some of we're looking at the existing data systems real time right this second, trying to figure out what do we need to build in terms of a dashboard, but what do we actually need to invest in the system itself.
This is helpful, but it also, I think, to me, really highlights the importance of more qualitative feedback, because I think folks at the local level are just dealing in a whole host of very sort of unique complexities within their own communities and given the children that they themselves are serving. And I think if we're going to understand what we're doing, we need to understand the milieu in which it's happening.
Yeah.
And I think understanding some of the decision-making processes too. Sorry.
Yeah. And no, and I think that's exactly, I think I wonder, as Secretary Pizer was, talking through summer and kindergarten previously, whether some of that structures might be an opportunity to dig deeper qualitatively into a couple key communities and understand some of the different dynamics, and where we can also balance at EEC the investment it takes to kind of get that qualitative information and the balance of staff time and resources, and trying to think through that. So trying to leverage those places, CPPI, those places where we do have some investment at the hyper local level, across programs to understand the landscape a little bit better too, I think will be a huge opportunity. So I want to make sure we have time to get to the rate reserve investment specifically today. So please know that this will be ongoing conversations, particularly as we look at data collection, data utilization, and how we inform ongoing conversations. And I think that we do take very seriously these real micro data points that we're getting also in our engagements, and been able to ask really targeted questions. And we do put out the data that we're hearing every month. So everyone, there is transparency. So encourage you to look at our engagement website that serves not only for engagement on these types of things in our strategic plan, but also our childcare, our federally required childcare development block grant state plan, which all fits in together, right? That's all one plan that we're trying to think through collectively. And so really using that to help inform what supports and what changes we need to make as we think through federal and state investments collaboratively. So ongoing dialogue, but I want to make sure we get to the next section. So moving to the next component. So for our rate increase this year, so as you all know, if we can, yeah, perfect. As you all know, there was a $20 million rate reserve that was put to be able to fund our an increase in our subsidy rates this year. When you look through the caseload numbers and the details you have in the appendix, you can see that that while we are not seeing rapidly increasing enrollment in our subsidies right now, and so really being thoughtful about investing in this, but considering where some of the biggest pain points for enrollment are, it is around transportation. And obviously you all knew this long before I got here, because this is something that had been part of discussions and studies and conversations. But seeing right now for our transportation, for those who need transportation, be given the social distancing and the operational cost for that specific service, many providers have had to question whether they can provide it at all. And we have alleviated the requirement in many cases because we know this is too much of a burden for families, but we know that many providers are grappling with this. So as we looked at the rate reserve, we really aimed to make sure that that was a key investment so that we could, again, really address one of the biggest pain points that we were hearing in the field. So the structure right now, and you'll notice there's about $200,000 that we anticipate, given the huge fluctuations in our caseload month to month. This is based on data, but we do anticipate it seeing it fluctuate. So we anticipate that 8.8 will likely increase as we see more enrollment increase. So the SEIU family child care system or family child care contract required a 2% across the board increase to all center-based to all family child care providers. So we've matched that on the rates that center-based and family child care systems are able to or will be getting from this, as well as being able to increase the daily add-on rate that it will make an even $20 at this point. And then really, again, looking at the doubling of our transportation reimbursement, given the fact that our capacity of our buses and vans have been cut in half all year. So being able to really think through the impact on already low transportation rates on our increasing limitations on operational capacity. So this is where we have been focused in trying to put these rates out to the field. On the next slide, you have the structure for what we'd be proposing for implementation, voting on the rate increase today, and then we will need to amend contracts, and it would be billed starting in May, and would be retroactive at that point. So if you just, in terms of our system, beginning May 1st, the providers update their April information. So that would be the point that we'd be able to be prepared to do that. So this is the structure of this. Happy to take additional questions or thoughts on this investment, but the proposal, this is the proposal that from EEC, responding to what we're hearing from the field.
Thanks. I just want to flag that we have 2 members who have to leave in the next 2 minutes, and I would say that it'd be great to make the vote unless there are major.
I move for approval.
All right. Thank you. All right, get ready. It's a long one. Dave, Allison, please hang on for just a moment. I make the motion that the Board of Early Education and Care hereby approves the department's recommended 2% across the board rate increase to all center-based rates and the Family Child Care System administration rate, 96-cent increase to the daily add-on rate, bringing the rate from $19.04 to $20, doubling of the transportation reimbursement rates to $12 for one-way and $18 for two-way transportation, and increasing the rates for care that occurs by a relative in the relative's home from $12 to $12.10 for part-time, and from $20 to $20.15 for full-time. Second. Carolyn, you're the best. All right, I'm gonna go right along my screen. Carolyn.
Yes.
Eleonora Viegas Reimers.
Yes.
Joan Wasser-Gish.
Yes.
Sheila Balboni.
Yes.
David Cruz.
Yes.
Allison Schoenwald.
Yes.
Jim Pizer.
Yes.
Joni Block.
Yes.
Nikki Ruiz.
Yes.
And that is everybody. Thank you. So moved. Thank you.
Post-vote question.
Yeah.
So the 20 million for the rate increase, is that built into the FY22 maintenance budget for EEC?
Yes. The $20 million, right, I was looking at the secretary to make sure I had all of my details exactly right on that, but it is built into the 3060 and 4060 caseload account.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other thoughts or questions on this front? Otherwise, we'll close on the caseload.
Yeah. I will happy to take any other questions on it, but wanted to make sure that you all knew in the appendix that we aren't going to spend time at this meeting knowing the time on capturing the trends, because they do tend to stay very similar to what we have been seeing. We haven't seen dramatic changes in trends. I do anticipate, as Secretary pointed out, with changes in the DESE landscape over the next months, that we will start to see different trends, and of course we'll pay attention to those and bring those back. So, but you have all the details. I'm very happy to answer questions in the appendix, but aren't seeing any dramatic changes in terms of caseload continuing to lower our to lose caseload, but also see our school age investment continue to increase. So, and with that, very happy to have ongoing conversation, but that concludes where we are. And thank you very much for all of the support and collaboration on getting to this point. And it really does, I think, feel with the investments we're able to make, that we're going to make a significant impact in the field, in being able to stabilize programs as we move forward.
Yeah, I just want to say, I just continue to be so grateful for and impressed by the commitment to data use in all of this decision making and modeling and predicting, starting with the strategic plan, but then building it out with ongoing data. I really appreciate that aspect of it. It's very easy then to really latch on to the principles and the plan.
That is it. I think one of the most difficult things in government is the imperfect data that we have to work with. And so very, very many kudos to the team who've been calling through to figure out the information we can find in what is massive amounts of imperfect data that need to tell us something to move forward. So thank you for that. And thank you to the team who's really committed to making sure that happens.
Yeah, and the conversation about progress monitoring is really inspiring. I think to the extent that we continue to talk about ways to capture and estimate progress and impact. I must say, I'm sorry Mary Wallachy wasn't here for that decision, because that is her favorite topic and one that was extremely frustrating to her in my first few years, I feel like. So a good testament to a good send off for Mary today.
I can't wait to talk to her all about it on the Cape.
Exactly. Well, it's great to see you all. Commissioner, thank you again for not just today's meeting, but all that it represents, and a strong team that continues to just work between the strategic and the everyday and the sort of crisis and post-crisis. And I think it does feel like a juncture, and I'm thrilled that there is an unprecedented federal investment in and attention to childcare. And I feel like we're really well poised to use the dollars in ways that will really make a difference, not just in the short run, but in the long run too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you all.
So we'll keep in touch. Great to see you all, and enjoy the rest of this week. Sunny one. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.